first question is for Brian Wallach. Brian, if you're still with us here on Zoom, we appreciate your testimony earlier, and because of your work, you've got so many people engaged in the cause, and kudos to you for that. Question, what would your risk tolerance be for a new therapy that has documented real-world evidence showing efficacy and has received provisional approval from the FDA? We'll come back to Brian if he's still with us on Zoom. Okay.
I think there's
Go ahead, Brian.
delay.
I have no other option for new treatments other than the expanded access program or provisional approval. And as my disease is 100% fatal, I am willing to take risk that other patients may not be, because I know that if I do not try, I know that if I do not try safe, promising treatments, I will die. And as Peggy said, we know that each treatment does not make a cure, but together they can create a cocktail similar to what we had in HIV that will keep me alive and turn ALS from fatal to chronic. And so my simple answer is that ALS patients are willing to accept greater risk because we know what is behind door number 2.
Thank you, Brian. Next question will be for Mr. Deseret. Thank you for sharing your story. Sorry for the loss of your daughter. Your advocacy, though, of course, means a lot to her and her legacy. Do you feel that any current drug approval or access programs at the FDA address rare terminal pediatric cases like DIPG?
I don't. That's the reason I'm here. I'm here because there isn't anything that applies to this. I mean, the amount of patients that we talk to that are reaching out to us, and they're reaching out to us partially because they're not getting any answers from medicine or drug companies or anything of that sort. It's almost impossible at that point. And it's because of really 2 things. One reason is because of time. We don't have that time. We have 2 weeks. Nothing gets done in those 2 weeks. I've had so many times where I've seen a compassionate use has been approved for a patient, but it usually comes in several days after the patient has already passed. You want to talk about a difficult call? That's a horrible call to make. I've also seen where it doesn't address anything having to do with pediatric. We write laws with the idea of adults. And if you look at any of these guidelines that we have put forth through the FDA, we grant waivers for them not to do it in pediatrics, but we never go the opposite way. And so because of that, we have to wait, and we have to hope that it can go through all of the adult trials first before it can ever get to a child trial. And so it never gets started. And so at the end of the day, we can't get access to those drugs. The time is not the right amount of time, and the children are being ignored in this. It shouldn't be that way.
Thank you. I'll yield back. I do have more questions. Back to Chairman Casey.
I'd say to Ranking Member Braun, if you want
Go ahead.
to ask another one. Still had about a minute, so.
This question will be for Dr. Plews Ogun. FDA has a variety of drug approval pathways and designations. In recent years, the agency has begun to take steps towards creating a more accessible and flexible system. However, millions of Americans with these diseases still lack any FDA-approved treatments. Could you highlight the holes in the FDA's drug approval and clinical trial system that your husband, James, has fallen through?
Thank you for that question. So I'll just mention two. One, I think we've heard a lot about today, and I want to be really clear that that problem is really important to me, and that problem that I would like to see solved is that patients who are dying don't have timely access to promising, safe therapies. Just to be clear, I don't think anyone you've heard speak is suggesting a change to the safety standard. This is about time, it's about access. The FDA process involves, first of all, early trials to establish safety, phase 2 trials to confirm safety and establish potential efficacy, and then phase 3 trials. The phase 3 confirmatory trials to confirm efficacy can take an additional 4 to 8 years. These are years, obviously, that no one on this, sitting at this table has had for themselves or their loved ones. The time it takes for these confirmatory trials is simply too much for these particular patients with these particular diseases. So we want access to promising therapies when early evidence has been established and is being confirmed. All we want as an alternative to certain death is a pathway that allows us access to these therapies at the point where safety and promising evidence and effectiveness have been established. The second point I want to make is that there's been a lot of talk about the accelerated pathway. Accelerated pathway is really not available to patients with ALS at this point, at least 95% of patients with ALS, because there is no reliable biomarker, and the accelerated pathway requires or relies on biomarkers or surrogate endpoints. So that's another huge hole for someone like Jim. That pathway really doesn't apply.
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Bhatnagar on biotech risk. On these diseases, mostly smaller companies address them. It can be billions of dollars, years to submit a new drug application to the FDA. Larger companies generally don't do it. Tell me a little bit about, is the market cooling for this due to the fact that we got a process that is stubborn and bureaucratic?
Thank you, Senator, and the answer is yes. There are parts of the biotech ecosystem that are doing well. I mean, science is robust. Patient advocacy is stronger than it's ever been before. But what's cooling is the funding environment. And you can see that if you look at the XBI, which is a gauge of public companies, it's down more than about 30% this year. This may be the third year in a row it's down at a stretch, which would be the first time that's the case since it was first conceived. Number of companies going under has been phenomenal. Number of layoffs has been extraordinary. So yes, the ecosystem is
And would the
cooling.
Promising Pathways Act address that in a way that would be meaningful, so we at least keep businesses in business to try to work on these ailments?
I think so. When you think of why that's the case, I think the uncertainty in the regulatory environment is a big factor for rare disease companies. Companies like mine, we work on 1 or 2 programs. And if you don't have the clarity, then it's hard to get the funding to do the work. So yes, if there is a pathway that is more certain, it would definitely help.
Thank you. I yield back.